It's Thursday, January 9th. I did not do much commuting today, so I'm going to do a little update from the office here at home. I have a question, sort of theme, topic, I guess. I don't know how to frame it, from LinkedIn. It's from a friend of mine on LinkedIn who I haven't heard from a little while, so this was kind of nice. And they're talking about doing a bit of a job transition. They had actually watched a video on my main channel, Dev Leader, about looking for like kind of how you value going from company to company. And this is actually something that we talked about together on Code Commute. So I used that topic from Code Commute to make a YouTube video on my main channel. And then now I'm sending this person back to Code Commute to watch this one. So it's pretty cool. And essentially, what they're saying is like the the act of like reverse interviewing is kind of challenging. And I think this is something that people don't think about a lot. But like, what does that mean to reverse interview? Well, it's kind of like you might have some companies in mind where you're like, hey, I hear that they're awesome to work at. Like a lot of people will do this for big tech, where they're like, oh my god, I would love to work at Google or Facebook or wherever, because they carry like that. I don't know. The brand associated with them is like people want to go there to go make money, work on cool stuff, like whatever it happens to be. But obviously, these are like only a couple of companies, right? There's lots of amazing places that you could be working. So, um, this person's saying, like, I'd love to hear your take on this in terms of like reverse interviewing. Any red or green flags to look out for, questions to ask to get a good idea of what the work environment is like. So, I wanted to talk through this. I think this is important. I know probably I'm making an assumption here, but I feel like probably a lot of people that are watching this are like, why does it even matter? Like, I'm just trying to get a job. But I think that even when things are challenging in terms of the job market and stuff like that, I think that you still need to establish like a bar, a threshold of places that you're willing to work at. And I understand that's hard to hear because if you are like, I just need something, I get it. Um, and one could argue if you're going from zero paycheck to some paycheck, that's better. So I'm not there to disagree on that, but my point here and what I want to be able to focus on is that like when it comes time to getting a job, keeping that job, a big part of our lives is our career. We spend a lot of our lives working, and if you're in the long run, if you're just working somewhere to get that paycheck and that's it, there's probably a large part of your life just literally based on the amount of time you spend at work. If you're not enjoying work in some capacity, that I feel like that's ultimately going to be a lot of wasted life, unfortunately. So, and not only that, if you end up working in a place where you feel stuck, like I need this job and I hate being here, but I need this job. I feel like that's kind of like trapping probably many people. So again, regardless of your current situation, I'm not trying to minimize the challenges with the job market. Just wanted to kind of set the stage here. So my thoughts on this in terms of being able to reverse interview or to make sure that you're going to a place that you want to work. I think this starts before the interview, and that's sort of my first tip is lots of research. If you're going to larger companies, one of the nice things is that it's probably easier to find people that work at these larger companies. It's probably easier to find reviews online. With some caveats, though, uh, I think it's kind of like a common thing with I would say like company reviews, like in terms of like exit stuff or like job boards where people are posting like about places they've worked. Usually, if you were to leave a place and you loved it there, even when you love it somewhere, you probably don't go, you know what, I'm gonna go on Blind or what's the other one, Glassdoor or whatever, and I'm gonna write something awesome. Like it's just like not a I don't know. I feel like that's not a thing people do statistically. But if you were pissed off, if you had a terrible experience somewhere, it's almost like we're soured by some experience. We're gonna go write something negative. um, more often than not. So I don't have exact stats on this, but I would say that when you're reading stuff, you'll likely notice that stuff is more heavily skewed to be negative. Um, Now, that's not to say that we should ignore that. Um, but what I would do instead of just saying like, oh look, there's some negative comments, therefore we should rule it out. I would try to look for some like what you might feel like are grains of truth or common patterns in the negative comments. So, for example, if you started to notice like people talking about culture and okay, well, what about the culture? Oh, the culture is cutthroat, or culture very much doesn't value work life balance, or culture is I don't know, like maybe culture is laid back, like some positive things, right? Culture is very bureaucratic, like you can't, basically you're not working, you're just kind of like playing politics the whole time. I think these are I think these are important things to try and see if you can extract. But this is something that happens before the interview, right? Before you're considering applying to these places. So I'd recommend that on the first part of that I said, you can go on LinkedIn, you can go on X, you can go wherever, and look for people like for employees that are posting stuff on social media. I think that's a maybe an easier way to do it. This might be like uncomfortable for some people if you're not active on social media, so I get it. Um, but it might be an opportunity for those of you that are kind of willing to do this. Is look for employees at the company. Maybe you can reach out on LinkedIn, send them a message. I don't know for like as a creator, I you pay for a premium account just so there's a little bit more accessibility. I don't know. You probably get a couple of in-mails per month or something. It might be something you could reach out to an employee that seems like they're active on LinkedIn, and send them a curious message, not to be like, hey, here's my resume, like get me a job, refer me, but to be like, hey, I've been, just give you an example, I've been interested in Microsoft. Um, if I got a message that was like, "Hey, I've been interested in Microsoft. Could you, I know maybe you're busy, but like, could you spend a couple minutes and just like maybe let me know about the work culture?" All right, something like that. This actually came up the other day on Blue Sky. Someone tagged me on someone else's post and said, "Hey, like I think Nick could answer this for you." And they were asking about what the culture was like at Microsoft because they had a friend that was considering applying and wanted to kind of pass that information along to them. So I said, hey, like send me a message and we can connect. And I wrote them a ton. I just gave them a ton of information about my experience at Microsoft and what that's like. So my point is like, if you're curious, you can create those opportunities and you can ask. That was a complete stranger. To be completely honest, I don't recall who even tagged me on this stranger's post. But this is like one of the powers of social media and networking, right? You create some of these opportunities for this type of stuff. So the um the next part I kind of wanted to talk about though was like what should we be asking about? And this is interesting. I think this is going to be a lot more situational, personal, and the things that you're looking for. Um, some things that come to mind are I hinted at some of them already. Sorry, I have to yawn. I feel like I was holding that in like the entire time. It like needed to escape. But I hinted at a couple of these, and like work life balance is a big one. I think team culture. By the way, this will change from team to team, but you might get an idea if you ask a few people. So team culture, work life balance could be if you're interested in like. I know some people will ask like, okay, proprietary technology, like, and I think it's a fair concern to be like, if I go work somewhere and it's all proprietary, if I want to leave, like am I getting totally isolated from what the rest of the world is doing? That could be a concern. Uh, People sometimes are curious about like the legacy systems and whatever's going on. By the way, basically every single company ever will have legacy systems. Part of being a software developer is working on legacy systems. Um, Another quick reminder: legacy systems are usually the ones that are making the money. So try not to be afraid of these things. But I think that if you're curious about how legacy systems are handled, that could be interesting, right? Like you could ask questions about how much time is spent, like sort of creating greenfield stuff versus maintenance, because that could be a difference. Is like, hey, we have this. legacy code base for our flagship legacy product, but like um we're iterating on it, like we're still building on it, or is it like this thing's in maintenance mode and basically you're going to get stuck on the team that's just keeping it afloat? So that could be some different aspects you're thinking about there. Um, but ultimately, we want to come up with some questions. And when I make videos like this and I'm trying to explain things, the I'm just trying to give you ideas. Sometimes it's perspective, maybe frameworks that you can try working with, and ideas, right? Because I can't tell you what you value, but I can give you some ideas for things that you might think about, and at least some patterns for that. So you can go, okay, Nick mentioned like work life balance, but like, I want to know if they have good perks. Maybe for you, in terms of like healthcare and like health insurance. I don't. I'm from Canada originally. I don't really think about these things, but I guess it's a thing. And Microsoft has good benefits, so I just yay. Like I don't really know a lot about it. So um, I think that if these things are important to you, like find and identify those things for you and come up with your list, right? That way, you can use that in the first part we were talking about, which is some outreach. And then we can start to, sorry, there's two parts. The outreach that you may do, you could try to check that out from Glassdoor, Blind, and wherever else. So, a couple of examples. Then we can even take those and we can say, okay, let's talk about the reverse interview part, because so far I've been not avoiding that, but I've been trying to tell you the things before you actually get to the interview. So let's assume you've done your homework. Um, Sorry, I'm getting a message and it's right behind my camera and I want to respond to it and I can't yet. Um, the uh, the part where we're in the interview. So you've done your homework. You've job application did the trick. You're going through your rounds of interviews. Um, this is an opportunity, and like people have different opinions about this, where they'll say, "Hey, look, if you're getting the opportunity to ask questions in the interviews, like here's like 5 of the best questions that you should ask to nail your interview." I'll be transparent from my perspective. Like for me, and like being the interviewer, uh, it's kind of like it's bullshit to me to say that there's like some secret questions you should be asking. Um, that portion of the interview for me is an opportunity to sell you on the position. Um, I think, and this is just a little bit of a tangent, uh, I spent all that time interviewing you, right? You trying to prove to me why you're a great fit for this position. I want to make sure, and even if I can tell like they're not going to be a good fit, and maybe I knew that earlier in the interview, I still want to make sure that I can sell them on the position. I want to talk about the awesome things we're doing and like why where I'm working is someplace that I enjoy. So in my head, like my approach to that portion of an interview when there's time for asking questions and stuff is for me to sort of represent the company. I want to tell you why we're awesome. So that just means that any question you have, like I'm ready to try and kind of explain our perspective, or at least my perspective on the things we're doing. Which means like like personally, I am mentally preparing for you to ask me questions like this kind of stuff, like okay, hey, can you tell me what the work life balance is like? Can you tell me about the team culture? So the point is that when we're talking about reverse interviewing, I can't speak on behalf of every interviewer. I hope you get that. I know for videos like this, when I have an opinion, there will always be someone watching that's like, that's just not how it works, Nick. And I'm like, dude, I get it. Like, I can't possibly represent every single scenario. It's impossible. So deal with it. My point is that I'm trying to explain how I do it. And if I think that I'm an extreme outlier, I will try to give you some other perspectives on this. So you may have people that are looking for some fancy schmancy good questions in that part of the interview, but my philosophy and what I've always kind of seen as being part of interview groups is use that to sell the position, right? To tell people and candidates why it's great. But that means being prepared for asking those questions. So I don't think there's like a secret to reverse interviewing except for being prepared for the things that you actually care about. Sometimes they might come up in the conversation in the interview, right? Maybe in some of the behavioral interview questions, someone will be saying, like, hey, tell me about a time where you had a conflict on a team and how you resolved that. You walk through that and they're like, okay, awesome, great. And then they'll say things like, yes, on like here, we want to make sure in our teams, like, this is how we address this kind of stuff. So thank you for your answer. That was great. And in the conversation, you might pick up on things here and there where you're like, okay, like these are values that align with me. Like that's really helping. But odds are, because you're not the one conducting the interview, you're probably going to have some gaps in what you were hoping to hear. So, um, when people like sometimes people say, "Hey, like it's a it's really bad if you don't have questions at the end of the interview for the interviewer," and I don't think that it's like bad. Like if someone wrapped up an interview with me and they didn't have questions, I'm not going to be like, "Oh, like X for that person." It doesn't make sense to me. But I think it's a really good opportunity that if you're curious about anything, this is the time to ask, right? So ask me about the work life balance. Ask me about like what's a day in the life of a software engineer on my team. Talk to me about like how you guys balance like working with legacy code bases, like the things that you care about. I don't know what those things are, but ask me about those. So um, back to a couple of points though from the question that was sent. I'm just reading it on my screen. Um, in terms of like red and green flags, um, the red flags to me are when things seem like pre-canned. I guess it's hard, especially if someone's been doing a bunch of interviews in a day. You might have an interviewer where someone's like, so as the interviewee, you're like, hey, Nick, like, I just love to hear what the culture's like at Microsoft. And then this is my fifth interview for the day, and I've been interviewing for 7 hours, and I'm like, I don't like, we're like a family here. Bad example, but everyone gets triggered by that. But like sometimes when the answer feels kind of canned, and you're like, okay, but like, is that from a script? So sometimes like the way that I try to answer this stuff so it doesn't feel so canned, like when I genuinely believe what I'm saying, right? So someone will say like, "What do you enjoy most about working at Microsoft?" And there's a bunch of things I really like. So depending on like where I'm starting, sometimes I might say like, "Hey, like I really love the people that I work with and the fact that I can go into work and feel like I'm having like good, productive, like engineering conversations where we can challenge our ideas and stuff." Sometimes I catch myself and I'm like, "It sounds like super cheesy, dude." Like the person sitting across from me is probably like, "Oh, sure, okay, is that what Satya told you to say?" Um, and then so I catch myself and I'll be like, "Hey, look, like I realize it sounds like super cheesy or cliche," and I'm like, "But this is actually how I feel." And then I try to give them some other examples so that they know I'm actually like trying to talk about real things and not just like something that sounds regurgitated. So I think a red flag for me would be when someone is sort of telling you things that sound canned, but try to understand too that like days for interviewers can be pretty long too, and maybe they're just like that's the answer they got at the time. So maybe it's a yellow flag, orange flag, whatever. Um, red flags would also, and I don't really think I've seen a lot of red flags. So I'm trying to imagine myself being in this position, getting like a weird answer. People, I mean, if you got an answer that didn't align with you or what you're looking for, I think that's a red flag. Just kind of like you have to think about what you value, right? You might have gone through the interview, aced it, which is awesome. Congrats, right? Might be for cool big tech companies. So you're excited about that. You're like, hey, pay sounds good, work sounds interesting. And then you're like, hey, like, cool, tell me about the work life balance. And the interviewer's like, man, like, it's pretty rough. Like, we often are working like over the weekends. And maybe you're totally into that. And you're like, cool, I love to work. Um, Probably most people are going to be like, oh, ooh, I'm not sure. And if that's really something where you're like, not going to work for me, then that's a red flag, right? Like, I think that you need to look at those things. The reason you're asking those questions is because you care about those things, right? Or they'll say like, yeah, I mean, realistically, all of our teams are just maintaining that legacy product. That's all they do, and we're just kind of keeping it afloat. You might be like, yeah, that sounds pretty terrible. Like, I get I have to work in a legacy code base a bunch of the time in my career. Nick said so, but like, wait, they're not even like adding new stuff. Like, they're just kind of fixing bugs. Like, maybe that's a red flag. So look at those things that you really care about. I feel like that one probably sounds obvious, but I can also imagine people going through asking these questions and being like, cool, I asked the question. Like, I feel good. I got that off my chest. But like, was it the answer you wanted? I don't know. Um, Other red flags, uh, people not answering the questions would feel kind of weird, I guess. But ultimately, I think the biggest red flag is when it's not aligned with what you're hoping for, and you might be able to try and clarify that, right? So maybe someone says something, and you're like, oh, like, hey, what do you mean by that, or like, do you have another example or whatever? So don't assume just because you get one thing like that's a rule kind of thing, but something to think about. Green flags definitely stuff that aligns with you. I think personally, and this is going to be different for everyone, depending on sort of your social skills and like awareness and stuff like that. But you might be able to pick up when someone's actually genuinely excited about something, and it's kind of I actually love seeing this in interviews where I've talked about this where for like side projects and stuff, right? If I have the opportunity, someone's got something on their resume that's like a side project, and I'm like, hey, like, so notice you're, you've been building an app for a couple years or whatever, and said you using these kind of things. Like, could you walk me through like kind of how this came to be, or like how you started building this, or why you started building it? Sometimes you'll notice that people are in interviews, so maybe they're a little nervous, and then all of a sudden something just like clicks, and they're like, oh man, I can't wait to tell you about this. Like, I'm genuinely excited. Like, they kind of turn on. And I think that sometimes when you're asking questions back to the interviewer for the like sort of this reverse interview part, sometimes you'll pick up on this from people. And I think that's a really big green flag because it's I don't want to say it's impossible to fake, but I feel like it's pretty difficult. And especially if you know what I'm talking about and you've seen people do this, where they just kind of like genuinely get very excited about something. It's cool. I say it's cool and I'm smiling because it makes me very happy to see people like kind of get into that mode because I don't know. I feel like we don't get to see that enough. So you might see that with your interviewer. You'll say, hey, I'm just going to make this up, right? Like, hey, like, so tell me about your favorite thing about working at Microsoft. And then the interviewer might have been kind of going through the motions and then they're like, oh, like, actually, this really cool thing, like, our team is responsible for building this product. And like, I actually was a really big part in building this thing up in the earlier days. Now I've moved on to like being a, senior software developer, but like, you might notice the way they start talking about that stuff. They're like, I'm so glad you asked. Like, I've been waiting for someone to talk to about this. So anyway, that might be a very big green flag for you. So I think that's something to look out for. Um, and then, so the only other part in this question that I don't know if I've done a good job answering is like, they specifically said like, what questions to ask to get a good idea of what the work environment is like. I think something I think that kind of works well is like, can you walk me through like a typical day in the life of a developer on the team, and acknowledge like I know that every day might be different, but like you know they mentioned that they have like cross geography teams, like maybe like kind of mention that like in terms of like having to work with the engineers that are in China or in India or in Europe, like could you kind of walk me through a typical day of a developer here in North America and maybe what those interactions look like. So if you have some specifics to call out, this is maybe one of the tricks, right? If you ask generic questions, you get generic answers. But if you can add in some specifics, that might help get you some information about what you're curious about. You might say like, hey, like maybe this is gonna backfire now. I feel like these days people are so up in arms against it, but like, hey, like, do you do agile? Like that used to be a thing where people would be like, man, I'm not gonna work at that place if they're like not an agile shop. But now everyone's an agile shop, and everyone's like, oh, agile's so dumb. So I don't know. Fine, you can ask something about how their development process works, but I kind of like the what's a day in the life look like, because you can get that opportunity to focus on some specifics that you might really care about. Um, Maybe depending on your level, I'm gonna wrap this up in just a sec, but maybe depending on your level, you could say like, if you're a junior software developer, hey, like, what does it look like to be on this team? And the sort of balance of like junior to senior to principal staff, whatever they have. And like, what does that kind of look like? And what's kind of like the team culture around like, I don't know, collaboration and stuff like that. And just see if you can maybe navigate that, because that might be really important for you as someone who is just getting started and like probably would really benefit from an environment that's really like that. So ultimately, I think a couple things just to kind of circle back. There's work that you can do way before the actual interview. So please do that. I think you really want to understand for yourself what things you care about. The other video I made on a similar topic was around like, if you're going to go, I think I titled it like the grass is greener on the other side or something. So I'm probably not going to link it above because I'll forget, but you can search for it on my channel. And the idea was really like, if you're going to leave, like, it is always going to be a bit of a gamble, right? Maybe the pay is better, but you're going to go there and you don't really like working on that team, the dynamics off. So I think it's important for you to think about what you want. Okay, so trying to imagine you're doing the work at the place, put yourself in that position, think about what you want, come up with a list of things that you really care about. You can use that list then to go get the information from reviews. You can reach out to people online. Social media does work for this. A reminder, right? If you were like, "Hey Nick, what is it like to work what is it like to work at Microsoft?" I don't know, that was hard to say. Send me a message. I don't do resume reviews, but if you want to know what it's like to work at Microsoft, I'll tell you from my experience. Send me a message. I don't care. But you can do this with other places, right? So do that. And then when it comes time for reverse interviewing, just remember that what were those things you care about? Ask those questions, right? You try to be prepared, because if you're given that opportunity to ask questions, like it's only going to be more difficult to get those answers if you don't take that opportunity. Final thought that I forgot to mention is sometimes during the recruitment process, like the back and forth, there could be an opportunity to ask extra questions. When I interviewed for Microsoft, I was interviewing for Amazon at the same time. I had 3 offers from Amazon, not to brag. It was a really good set of interviews. I really enjoyed it. And they had, after I had the offers, they let me do 3 additional interviews with the engineering managers of those teams, which is super cool. This is a really smart move on their part, in my opinion. If they wanted me, and it seems like they did, they put on 3 extra interviews, one for each team, not to interview me, but to give me like a full on half hour to just go ask them questions. And that was how they tried to say, okay, we want this person. Let's try to sell them on the position, right? Um, and like I'm not like calling them out on it or anything, but like you could tell, like they're like, hey, yeah, oh no, our team's the best. And that was one of the funny parts, right? Was like, it wasn't at that point, it wasn't Amazon trying to hire me. It was those teams trying to say our team of the 3, we're the best one. Like come to us, which is just a funny dynamic. But anyway, the point is that I'm trying to give you an example of like, I'm not making it up when I say that in those periods, that's generally trying to, from my experience, something where the companies try to sell you on the job position. So try to be prepared with your questions for that. I hope that helps. Again, if you have questions, put them in the comments. I'm happy to try and answer, or do as some of these other people have done. Find me on social media. Just look for Dev Leader. Send me a message. And LinkedIn, it's just Nick Cosentino. My profile should be open. You should be able to message me, and I'm happy to try and give you some perspective. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this helped. I'll see you next time.